Hey, welcome everybody. I'm John Wynn, the director, producer, editor of Rising Hawk.
And I'm Nathan Moore, producer. Now, I will say, outside of the amazing visuals and the story that you were able to put together as far as the direction, the music in this, even from the very get-go, Josh, our composer, really came up with some music that really set a texture and a place, outside of the amazing visuals of the Carpathians.
It was important. Josh came on as the composer later in the process. Mm-hmm. Usually I'd like to have the composer come on right at the beginning, if not even in prep, when I start writing music. But due to the international composition of our producers and crew and whatnot, he came on much later in the process and didn't have a tremendous amount of time to work on the score. You'll actually hear a lot more of the score after this particular scene, which we'll talk about in a second. But Josh came in and was really fun with us, and like you said, the music alone creates its own story outside of the visual and outside of what we're trying to do, and it webs back into what we're trying to do, but on its own it tells its own story. You could almost watch the movie with just the music and get everything you need. That's a testament to Josh. Also a huge testament to Sergei and the Ukrainian orchestra, the National Ukrainian Orchestra. They were the actual musicians who did it, and they did a fantastic job of doing the recording. This is our opening scene of the movie. This was actually in the script, not the opening of the film. This was actually many scenes later, but we kind of always knew when we were shooting, and once you and I were deep in editorial, and also a shout out to Victor, who was our Ukrainian editor who helped us organize the initial assembly cut. We always knew we were going to shift this probably to the beginning to give us a more dynamic opening, to also set up the threat. We don't come right out and say it's the Mongols, but we wanted to establish early on that there's a threat underlying this film. In a lot of ways, you and I's horror background, you produced all the horror things that I did before this film. We had always spent a lot of time setting up tension. Mm-hmm. And so I treated the beginning of this film a lot like that, where I wanted underlying tension.
And in case everybody missed it, it's almost entirely done in one shot, and minus a few edits there at the end. Like it's such a well planned, like a little high tense moment. Yeah. And in this shot as well, part of the reason I like it, beautiful CG shot that's done is it sets up a fairy tale. It sets up like this bigger than life story, because that's what the original content that the story was based off of was. It was a big fairy tale, and I think this shot and its like grandeur and the bigness of it like really sets us to like a kind of a fairy tale, like far off place.
That was kind of the intention here. This is the true opening of the film now. This is our young Maxim, and one thing I'll tell you is we have this amazing location. It's the Carpathian Mountains. We were there. It's beautiful. And again, you let the camera do 90% of the work. The actors are fantastic. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have Allison Duty here, and Robert's in the background there. Our two young Ukrainian actors came and worked to play our young Maxim and young Ivan, and both of these guys were fantastic too. One of the things though is we did this scene, which is pretty much the opening now of the movie narratively, and our final scene, we're on day one of shooting in the Carpathian Mountains, which I don't recommend usually that you start your movie and end your movie on the very first day of shooting, because you're just getting into the groove. Obviously this production was crazy in the fact that it's the first major U.S.-Ukrainian co-production for a narrative feature film. I'm pretty much the first American director to come and do a feature in Ukraine fully in
English language film.
Yeah, English language film, and a co-producing with another country kind of thing. And the crew didn't speak English. I had a bunch of translators on the set that did.
That's right. You now we're not there yet, but when we do get to the Mongolian actors, they had. How many translators did you have?
So we would have to go English to Ukrainian, Russian, which is very similar, Russian to Kazakhstani, and Kazakhstani to Mongolian, to be able to speak to Sarah Bold and the other Mongolian actors, which you'll see halfway through the film here.
Is my wife's favorite show. There it is.
So here again we have Alex McNichol, Rocky Myers playing respectively Maxim and Ivan, the two brothers. Obviously they're in very great shape, and again, for any actor out there who's wanting to do a sword and sandal movie, a lot of it is just the prep, and these two worked so hard constantly, even when we were shooting, they were working out constantly.
But not only working out, but they were working with your stunt teams and everything. Just in
Everything.
Like so much of the sword fighting and the actual battle scenes that we see in the back half of this movie, the actors were actually in there doing it.
Yeah, they're in 99% of their stunts. The stunt doubles are only in there for each one of them, maybe like a shot, maybe.
What do you think of this?
But while we were prepping, and even while we were shooting, they were not only training for stunts, learning horses, riding horses, refining their bow and arrow, their fighting technique, the whole deal. And on top of that, the acting part of it, which they were constantly worked on with me. Throughout all of shooting, we would rehearse in the evenings, even when we were offset. Andre here, who plays Petro, one of my favorite people that I met in Ukraine. He has no dialogue in the film, and yet I think his character is one of the most fully formed characters, just purely off of his acting ability. He's fantastic.
He brings such heart to like the role, and you know, like you have these brothers and family, but he's a great representation of like the village they come from.
Well, he gets to show you the admiration as an audience member. Like, you have to attach yourself to characters, and other characters help guide you to what you're supposed to feel. You need to show, not tell. And so when you see other characters feel certain ways for characters, it helps for you as an audience to kind of align yourself, especially if the character that's doing that showing part is likable. And again, Andre has this natural, as Petro has this natural likability. He's lovable in real life. I mean, he's amazing. So it just comes across. Here we have the Mr. Robert Patrick, and this is incredible for him because he's playing against an actor here, a Ukrainian actor. Who, shout out to our Ukrainian casting director Olga, who helped find this actor for me. But Robert's playing this scene with an actor who doesn't speak English, and so Robert has to be able to act without understanding what the other actor is saying, and the other actor doesn't know what he's saying. The Ukrainian actor, learned his lines phonetically in English without knowing what they meant, but he wasn't even 100% able to say them correctly, but just to get the shapes out of his mouth.
Sure.
And then we were able to go back later and ADR him in. But Robert did a fantastic job, and the Ukrainian actor as well did a fantastic job. I would butcher his name right now if I tried to say it, so I apologize for not pulling it up. But he was wonderful on set. Really, Robert took him under his wing too, and really buddied up with him, and I appreciated that.
Something that I think this scene gives a little taste of that may not have made it all the way to this final cut, but like the original source material of The Rising Hawk, Zakhar Barkut, by Ivan Franko, like the politics and the 13th century like townships were so like that was a big focus of the book. And so how did you and Rich, when you guys were like working on the script, form that into a story that like really emotionally and you know action wise makes those things exciting?
So, like you said, a big part of it was a good, 70% of the novel is, and it's a fictional novel, is about inner city politics or any inner village politics, and it is a wonderful thing. But what Rich and I looked at it as was
It's not big enough yet.
we wanted to respect the history of the novel and what it meant to the Ukrainian people, but we wanted to create an actual
I'll be going again tomorrow.
cinematic experience that wasn't necessarily just about quote unquote those politics, because we're making at the end of the day it's an action war
A
film.
universal movie.
And it's universal,
Yeah.
and people that are outside of Ukraine may not
Perhaps I'll bring the gift.
understand the village politics. So we needed to make that a little bit more palatable for a wider audience. And the way that we found, at least in the script form, and then ultimately the actors brought to the screen, and through me on set, pushing towards a certain direction, was you just narrowed down to really strong universal themes. And for us in this movie, obviously love, as you see on the screen right now with Rocky and Alina, who's our Ukrainian actress here, is fantastic. Love is obviously important, but more than that, it was about family and legacy of family. Because in Ukraine, family is very important. But family is important internationally. I mean, in the entire world. Most people would die for their families. So we really honed into that. And as we walk in here now with the legend himself, Tommy Flanagan, again, as you will see this scene play out, at the core of his character, even though he's quote unquote for the first half of our movie a villain, his villainy he isn't a clown, he isn't a character. His motivation is based around wanting to protect his small, very tiny family versus Robert, Zakar, Maxim, who's Alex. They are part of a big village, and they have an extended family, whereas Tugar doesn't have that, so he's holding on really tight to his daughter, to his fortune, because that's his family. And so that's how we try to set everything up to honor the book, but yet expand it to an audience that wasn't familiar necessarily with the book and probably would never go and read the book. And so, and hopefully, maybe people after seeing the film will venture out and explore the book, because the book is lovely, and I did spend many, many days deep into that book, reading and researching it. But here you go. We, again, we're at the end of the day, we're making kind of a fun fantasy adventure movie, action. Here's Poppy. Poppy's an excellent bow and arrow, excellent horse rider, on top of just being an excellent human being and actress. But that's just her writing.
I remember you sending the dailies back when this first scene. This was one of the first sequences that you and then Victor put together as far as the edit was concerned. And I remember you guys sending it back while you were still shooting, and I believe my reaction was, "Holy smokes, who's that?" Because she's a superstar.
Yeah,
and really, like the casting that both you and the Ukrainian.
So we had Venus here in the U.S., Venus Canali, and then Olga, who is our Ukrainian casting director, who took care of a lot of our. In Ukraine, they don't separate really background actors from foreground actors, and so it kind of all gets mixed together. And Olga and Anastasia, her assistant, took care of a lot of that for me and brought me choices. But our casting, ultimately, at the end of the day, as a director, you live and die by your casting. And for us, I was very, very fortunate that the actors that are part of our project wanted to be part of it, were willing to trust me. I was bringing them to a country none of them had been to.
Sure.
I personally had, never been to until I came to prep the film. And they came and did this. So we're, part of making movies is all about pacing and understanding how to keep it going. We actually have a much longer cut of the film that we love that's closer to 2 hours and 30, almost 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's kind of our epic, ultimate Ridley Scott version of the film. But we knew that we were making this movie not just for us, but also, for a wider audience, and also for economic reasons and business reasons. We needed the film to be a certain length. And even though I love, and I know you love that longer cut as well.
Yeah.
This 2 hour-ish cut is the preferable version, I think, for most audiences, because the pacing of it is very good.
It's relentless.
It's relentless. You get into
it.
I
mean, we're still here in the beginning part of the first act, and I think for us, when we were in post-production on the film, it's the part of the film that we spent the most time on, as far as making sure that everything was set up correctly, so that all the action of the back half of the film really pays off.
Yeah, we had a completely different opening for a long time that filled in more of the backstory and maybe a little bit more rounded off the characters' motivations a little bit more, or maybe a little bit more repetitively.
Just for us, yeah.
Yeah, and I liked that, but ultimately we needed to get to certain things quicker because we have a lot of stuff happening in the second and third acts. And so we needed to do that. So we're here now into, halfway through our first act. Actually, more than halfway through. We're actually about 2/3 way through our first act now. This is our there's only 2 days of shooting out of 60 that were not on an actual location. And this is one of them. We did this one on a set. This is not out in a real cave. Vlad, who is our production designer, who won a Ukrainian Academy Award for production design.
We got a couple of those actually just recently.
Yeah, we did.
The production design, the costume design,
Alla.
Hair and makeup.
It's Alla. So Antonia is Tonya is our costumes, and then Alla is our hair and makeup. So
really great teams that you were able to collaborate with over there, that knew the texture and the culture of the place and the time from living there and from their own heritage, and then being able to combine that with the storytelling sensibility of not just making it about that place, but opening it to all different cultures. I think part of the
I think all filmmaking is always collaborative. And at the end of the day, you're trying to find the people that you can communicate and collaborate the best with in this crazy environment to make the film. And English again was not their native language, and so I give them all the credit and props in the world for trusting me when I would tell them things and the translation might get a little mixed up. Cinematic or cinema terms are not the same as regular translations, so sometimes things were 100% understandable, but they always trusted at least in what I was pushing for and what the vision was. I storyboarded every shot in the movie and every scene in the film, and that helped. So I could show them, like, even the scene that we're watching now, this was fully storyboarded. I mean, everything was storyboarded that I did personally. So they were able to see that a lot of the times, and where we might not be able to talk about it in words, we could show each other in pictures. And they obviously knew what they, production-wise, had to create. But this whole sequence here takes place on a set. We didn't do this live, on a location.
One of the longer sequences it took to get right. Like,
this is actually the very first sequence I cut with Victor. Victor helped me do the initial assembly, and then I refined it and finished everything off. And the reason was the visual effects needed to be done early. We actually, it's not standard to do it this way nowadays, where a lot of times you go into production, your visual effects are already halfway through before you even start shooting. We were a little different in this way, where our VFX didn't even start until I was well into editorial. So I actually cut the sequence. I was still shooting at the very end, but I cut the sequence together so that they could start working on the visual effects. And as the VFX came in from Almagrad, that's the team who did this particular sequence, I would refine the edits slightly based on the VFX I was getting. And then I spent a lot of time with Almagrad going back and forth on doing that. And,
but it turned out, with the
well, it turns out great because, like, you're seeing a scene. We were on location, or set there. Here we're on location. But these two scenes, funny enough, were shot almost like, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks apart from each other, so they connect. But even here in some of these scenes, like, Tommy wasn't always on set with Alex and Poppy and Rocky for some of it. So, like, it's the power of filmmaking and editing, where you're able to cobble it together the right way in editorial. He eventually was on set for like the Masters and stuff, but because of the nature of the schedule and one of the unique challenges of shooting in Ukraine at this particular year, it's not always like this, but this summer that we made the film in the summer of 2018 is when I shot Principal. That summer it rained every single day for about 2 hours a day in the middle of the day. Like, so if I had a daytime scene like this, it would just start raining and I would have to stop shooting because this isn't supposed to be taking place in the rain, and continuity wise it wouldn't match. So I just kind of started planning for that in terms of my days, and I had a really great first AD, Natasha, and a second AD, Dasha, who helped me tremendously with the scheduling and arranging of these kind of things. But like for instance, this day here, we're doing these shots here of them, their reaction shots. Tommy was still probably 3 hours away from being on set that day, but we had slid up shooting some of this because the forecast that day was really bad in the rain. And we have other scenes we were shooting in this general forest over the course of a week, and so we were having to rearrange based on that. Later on in the film, you'll see we have a lot of night scenes as well, and I didn't know until I was there that in the summertime, because of the location on planet Earth that Ukraine is, it's very high up in the hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, and nighttime, true night, is only 5 hours. So 12-hour days.
Planned for like a 10-hour shoot night and got half of it.
Yeah, well, I would have to make a 10-hour day work in 12 or make it work in 5 because the amount of light we'd have. So a lot of things, like, I learned really quickly early in shooting to shift and make just really hard choices on that. Here we're back in Tuklia. One of the things I want to give a shout out to is they built, the Ukrainian crew, Vlad and his production design and art team and construction team built this village of Tuklia from the ground up. This is an entire village. It's got something like, I want to say 12 or 15 buildings, and they're legitimate. Like,
and
you could live
it's
in
not a set. Like, those are log cabins that are built.
They're still standing to this day. Yeah, they didn't knock them down. Like, they will probably stand for another 25 years. They're built from true Carpathian wood. It was cheaper for them to bring in the wood from the Carpathian Mountains than it would be like how we do it here in Hollywood, which is like foam and rubber and like things that aren't true materials to make it easier,
to make it look like it.
Yeah, they just built it for real, and it was easier and faster for them. They had a late start to the construction because in prep, they had a really bad winter that year too. So it was extremes. We had a bad winter and a bad summer. So it had snowed, and they were something under for them it's meters, but for us it's feet. So it was under 2 or 3 feet of snow. We had to get all that snow out of there for them to even start construction. This scene is important to me. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about kind of the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, and not so much in terms of what's happening on the screen. But this is one of the most crucial moments in the film. This is kind of like leading into the end of our Act 1. But Maxim has to make a choice here. He has to decide if he wants to expand outside of the world of Tuklia and this kind of contained land. He's lived his whole life, and he's kind of reach out and decide if he wants to go and be more in his life. And thematically for him, that's a choice he'll have to kind of live with, because he has to decide if he could easily just run away with Miroslava and leave his family behind and not be bothered by the oncoming threat of the Mongols and whatnot, or he could stay and defend his home. And as we talked about earlier, family is a big part of the legacy of this film. But
now, I remember when we first started talking about Tommy's character, Tugar, and just the gravity of performance that he gives in this role, but in the type of films that he's done in the past, so many sword and sandal films in the past, like Gladiator, Braveheart, he's the guy. And so what kind of did you guys have conversations about those types of things, or was it what was because I'd be like, yo, what happened?
Well, Tommy, obviously, we met, obviously here in Los Angeles. We had lunches and stuff when I asked him to come and do the film, and he was all about it. And, he knew I had told him I was a big fan of Braveheart and Gladiator,
sure.
And those were big influences on his film. But I also had told him Spartacus, the Kubrick version of Spartacus, was a huge influence on this. Even the Brad Pitt Troy was a big influence on this.
I know we talked a lot about Last of the Mohicans.
Last of the Mohicans is huge.
13 Assassins.
Those are both huge influences. Seven Samurai is a huge influence for us, and even Ben-Hur. And the thing is that Tommy is just such in a weird way, like a film nerd. He just loves film. He just loves story. And ultimately, once he was on set, we would mention sometimes those things. He would bring up occasionally when Mel Gibson was shooting this in Braveheart, we did this, and I would steal that. I'd be like, great, let's do that. But more than anything, Tommy is the type of actor who, if he trusts you as a director, he gives himself fully, and he 100% trusts it, and I'm so thankful for it. He just was always giving me what if I needed more, he gave me more. If I needed less, he gave me less. He was never one to say, there was a number of takes that he would hit and he'd be done. He would be we could go all day long. Honestly, if we had 100 shooting days, I could have done 100 shooting days with Tommy, and he was great. And he was lovely to the younger actors too. And Robert the same way. Robert was an incredible presence on set. Both him and Tommy were not on set as long as Alex and Robert and Rocky and Oliver, who plays Bohemian, and Poppy. But they were just instrumental in being really great role models for our younger talent.
You have these actors who have this wealth of experience, both in these genres, but also just on screen, and to be able to work with them in both a collaborative sense as director and producer, but also on screen with these guys. It's fun to watch that magic combine.
It's incredible. And Robert was in Terminator 2, obviously, as the T-1000, and Terminator 2 is my favorite action movie of all time. And growing up, that was the movie I would steal away to watch. And Robert was always so generous with in our off time, telling me stories about that. And in a lot of ways, on days where I was having a really tough shooting day, if Robert was on set, sometimes he would bring up my mood just by telling me a story about how James Cameron did something. And again, as a young director, that's encouraging to hear and wonderful.
But I think it speaks to as we continue to talk about the movie itself, a lot of the heart of it deals with legacy and those kind of things. But even filmmaking, it's you're only as good as the people you studied under. And so watching those people like James Cameron, watching those people that have such a knowledge of cinema, and being able able to learn from them and apply it. Like, I imagine.
Yeah, it's really great. It humbles you very quickly, but then also inspires you to go for more. We passed over a couple scenes here. Obviously, Poppy and Alex, Miroslava and Maxim are bonding. This village sequence in the script was actually a very long sequence, and I always kind of knew we were going to cut it down really shorter because we couldn't spend 15 minutes of the movie in the scene. But this whole sequence ended up being very difficult to shoot, not because of anything with the actors or whatnot, but again, rain was a huge thing. This actually was supposed to just be done in one day, one evening, which was 5 hours, which wasn't that long, but I had storyboarded it out and knew kind of like how we were going to shoot it. Mother Nature, however, decided that on the first day of shooting, she would flood the entire set. So we had kind of a huge problem where the entire set flooded, and we couldn't shoot in Tuklia for a week or so. So this actually, the whole festival thing ended up, was one day, became a 3-day thing over the course of 3 different days, over the course of I think it was 2 months. We would come back and pick up the pieces. So the festival is actually a combination of 3 different days, sometimes months apart. This is Victor. He's a Ukrainian actor, a Ukrainian Academy Award-winning actor in Ukraine, usually for comedy. He came in, doesn't speak a lick of English. I don't think he understood a word I ever said to him, but quite frankly, I just was like, do your thing, and we'll figure it out through a couple takes, and he was hilarious.
He was great. And then like you said before, we had a lot of really talented voice actors come in and add to the performances. A good friend of mine, E.K. Dagenfield, here in the States, came back and did some ADR work for us on that one.
Some wonderful uncredited work for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like when you're putting together a film like this, and for us, like really like being able to like sit in your living room and like dissect the film is like sometimes like your voice has popped up already several times in the film where as needed for ADR, but it becomes a village effort.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing that the Rising Hawk has really solidified for I think you and I, is that making a film is, you're so dependent on so many people, and you have to have great people around you, and we were lucky that we had great people constantly supporting us, working with us, doing, God, anything we asked, they would just be like, yeah, let's do this. And so I think it shows now on screen. Again, the Ukrainian crew did a wonderful job putting it all together. And then, we did, the edit was here back in the U.S. Victor would do, he and I would be up, I was basically working on Ukrainian time for many, many months here in the States, but we would do the assembly, and then I would do the edit here in the States, the actual finalizing, and then go back and forth with Postmodern, who's our home base for post-production. Olga over there, who ran that, was wonderful, and it's just a huge collaboration of over the course of many, many months, years,
now,
actually 2 years to make this film, but also thousands of miles, so in a world that we're in now with this we're in COVID land now as we're filming this commentary. It may become a more standard way of working, but at the time I did this film, it was still very new for me. This is actually one of the most important scenes in the whole film. This is where you get Maxim and telling Miroslava a little bit about his homeland, and up to this point, Maxim hasn't actually been the best ambassador for his own town. He's kind of got his eyes looking to the stars, kind of a Luke Skywalker.
He's got like a boyish
every young person wants to leave where they came from, but here he meets this woman who doesn't have this basis of history and foundation, and there's a pride that he has in telling her the story of his village, and in many ways this is the start of her actually starting to fall in love with him. Even the fun that they were having before was great, but it's here that she actually starts to see him, that he could be more than just this charming, boyish, roguish character, that he could actually have something that she doesn't have, which is history of family and foundation of family, something to fight for. She comes from a more privileged life that is easy but doesn't necessarily have a lot of substance.
And something I love with what you did as far as how you shot it is both Poppy and Alex in this scene do so much with their eyes, like in the close-ups, that like while the vista as far as being at the lake with the candles and like the reflection on the moon and all that is gorgeous, like so much of the emotion and so much of the importance of the information that's coming out is found right there in those two shots.
Yeah, for me as a director, I actually I've had long talks with actors about this. I'm not the biggest fan of like dialogue. I prefer a lot of times for my films to have less dialogue actually and just more physicality, like eyes, hands. The camera for me does a lot with wonderful actors, and so again, part of how I cast a lot of the times is actors' eyes. A lot of times if I can see it in their eyes, then that'll do it for me. I feel like we can get there with the words, but you can't always get there with the emotion that's intrinsic. Like that little nod right there from him, that's just within Alex, but that to me is more powerful than him saying like I love you, or like I'm into you. Like just the nod is for me a better choice.
Good to see you, Uncle. Safe travels back to
Yeah, so
you can see the kind of size of the village here. Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is a good opportunity to see a little bit more wider. We get a little wider on that opening shot here.
And they built the horse carts. They all of these things are built to be functional.
Everything works. To be honest, I don't have. It's one of my regrets on the film. When they get on the wagon and they're supposed to leave, I had storyboarded out, and I really wanted a shot of like our boys' POV of the wagon leaving, so you could see it going off. However, you're going to see here the wagon leaves, but on that take, which was the first take that I have of the wagon leaving, the wagon actually broke.
Oh no!
We
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so this is why I don't have a shot of the actual them on the wagon. Like we don't see them literally.
You got one shot of the wagon.
I just have one shot of the wagon driving off,
that.
and I don't have another one because it broke, and it would have taken 2 hours to fix.
Yeah.
And we didn't have 2 hours to spare, and we didn't have another wagon. So like here they go.
Yeah.
And watch actually, as they're looking, I had to cut away because it breaks and they start to laugh. Like full on lose it. So I had to cut that shot short a little bit. But then we obviously are able to pick it back up here. And again, Andre comes in as Petro and just kills this scene. This is one of my favorite parts where he punches him in the chest.
And another great young actor that was in that scene is the young actor that plays Ivan's son. And we'll get
Bhushan.
to see,
So that's
we'll get to see his shining moment a little bit later. But
Micah is his name.
Yeah.
So our horror background, we cut our teeth on horror, and before this film came up, we were supposed to be doing a horror film, and then this film came to us, and I kind of forced you into making this movie instead first. But this is a miniature version of like our horror background. It's not 100% shot as a horror, but I kind of stole a little bit of technique that we had refined over the years and did a simplified version of it to kind of build some tension in here. It wasn't, Rich and I didn't have the scene written this way originally, but once I had storyboarded it, I kind of looked at it as more of a horror sequence. Going back to the bear too, I did that with the bear sequence. I treated that as a horror sequence versus a full-on, action film. Is more Alien 1 versus Alien 2 kind of thing. Aliens. But that's just from our influences in the past. I felt like tension, suspense, and horror. It helps out with horror. Yeah. So this scene was actually was very hard to shoot. Mostly, again, we were in the Carpathian Mountains. It was really, the terrain was tough to shoot on. It was very wet. Funny little note too. Our actress who's playing this role here is a method actor and was wonderful in the role. I actually, on this day, was dressed as a Mongol because we were also shooting scenes for later in the film, and I was a Mongol later on in the film, and I was in full Mongol gear directing this scene, and it freaked her out because she was in full character, and she's running from the Mongols. So as I was giving her direction, it was really upsetting her because I was in the Mongol outfit. And I didn't realize it at first, and then it clicked, and so at one point I had to take off, I had this head piece on and had to take it off and take off the coat that I was wearing and stuff. But it's a testament to her that she was so dedicated to the role, so I appreciate that. Again,
and another one of the Ukrainian castings.
Yeah, that was another casting. She's the actress is a fantastic theater actor in Ukraine. And
this scene I always loved so much. Just just because of you don't necessarily have to see the action of the scene to know exactly how it went down. You know? Like
Yeah, there's something.
The aftermath of it is so much more like you imagine the action of the scene, but get the heartbreak of afterwards.
And this is where, the opening scene of the movie, where we have Sokka, the little boy who ends up getting killed early on by a Mongol. That scene does a lot of the work for you here, because you get an idea, because you've seen the danger. I don't have to tell you now. I don't need dialogue to be like, oh, how evil they are, or how horrible they can kill people. You've seen they were willing to kill a kid. Now, I say that, and it's important to understand, though, I had very long conversations with the Ukrainian producers about this, and I was very adamant about this, and I fought very hard about this, that I didn't want the Mongols to just be bad guys.
Absolutely.
I wanted our film to be almost ambiguous or unclear, that, like, if you really think about it, the Mongols are not incorrect in what they're doing. They're also looking out for their family. They are expanding their empire because they need to survive for their own empire.
Well, something that you and I had talked about, even getting into this, and not to get too far off of what's happening on screen, but like in researching like the Mongols, like you had said, like knowing that their knowledge of war was different from like the European knowledge of war. Their knowledge of war was you win.
Yeah, and again, I won't soften history here. I mean, the Mongols were a very brutal fighting force. They were the greatest army of all time, and they were ruthless. And they took slaves and enslaved people and whatnot. But what I was trying to make sure of was that we weren't just saying, like, it's this team versus this team.
Right.
It was that every team is justified in what they do. Unfortunately, when you get caught in the middle of that justification, you have massive conflict.
There's two sides.
And ultimately, I think you always have kind of a good and bad person in a film. You have a protagonist and antagonist. But for me, I looked at it as you have a stronger antagonist if you can kind of understand why that antagonist is doing what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So for me, like, again, Hans Gruber in Die Hard is a fantastic villain because he's a villain, but like he's the smartest person in the film. And on top of that, he's kind of like not wrong. Like, you know, I mean, it's wrong by the law, but like he's thought it out pretty well. And he's just so, it makes him more evil. Or scary, I should say. Evil's the wrong word, but scary, because he's not just a bumbling bad guy that we wrote that says he can do whatever. You know? This is our introduction here to Nergi, and then to Bohun, played by Oliver. And this scene here is one that we also cut early on and edited early on in the sequence of editorial and refined over time, but it was one of our early scenes that we showed off as confidence boosters to people.
Yeah, I think the original cut of this scene had this really amazing one-er.
We'll talk about this right now because this will make Alex and Rocky very happy. So there is a
include it.
There is a one shot that starts the sequence as they come into the village, and it was a lot of fun. It was very well choreographed, and it was
beautifully shot, acted, performed.
Yeah, and it was complicated, and it was good for the actors, and it was good for me. It's what we call like a director shot. Like, it's one of those shots as a director, you're like, that's what I like. I love that. I designed this. This is great. This is fantastic. But ultimately, it didn't advance the story.
Yeah, then you cut it.
And then I cut it, and it was hard. And to this day, Rocky and Alex are angry with me for cutting it. Angry in the fact that they won it for themselves because it took a lot of work to do, and there's action in it. It was very well done, and I loved that scene. And as a director, I love it. But when I take a step back and I look at the film properly, it didn't advance the story. And it was holding us up a little bit to getting what we like to refer to, I mean, it's a common term in the film industry, but a ticking clock. And early on, from the time that the boys show up to the village, to Uncle Karun's village that's destroyed, a ticking clock starts. And that wonder, although it was amazing and fun, was delaying the ticking clock because it was its own thing. And stylistically, too, it fit very well with the style of the movie, but I had also chosen stylistically to shoot the movie a certain way, which was very classical. Yura Karol, who's our DP, who was nominated for Best Cinematography in Ukraine as well. I really emphasized with him a certain way that I wanted to shoot the movie, and I think originally he was envisioning the movie a slightly different way, a more 300 style film. But for me, I wanted to go with something more classical, more timeless. And a lot of that had to do with, one, I wanted to really stay with my actors versus being about a crazy shot. Because I felt like this was a story that if we grounded it with the actors, ultimately in the second and third act, when the action really starts to pick up, it would mean more. If we were too stylistic in the opening with all these crazy shots and fun things, it would look cool and it would be really great for a trailer, but I don't think ultimately it would help the story. I don't think you would have really dug into the story as much. Obviously, we're spending a lot more talking about things versus the story, which hopefully you've seen the movie already, so you get a strong idea of what we're talking about, or you're interested in more of like this side of it. We can spend more time moving on, talking a little bit more about the story, because we did spend a tremendous amount of time not only with Rich and the scripting side of it, but on the editorial side, working on really refining the story. But I want to say here real quick, Oliver, who plays Bohun, man, he gave everything he had on this night. This was a really tough scene. He had been waiting around. I had him on set for like 2 days in a row to get to the scene because it kept getting rained out, and we had these 5-hour nights I was talking about. This was the first night scene that we actually were able to shoot. We had it scheduled to shoot before, but the nights were so short that I was like, I can't shoot this scene in 5 hours because there's so much stuff. So it took me 2 days to rearrange it and understand how I was going to shoot the scene properly to be able to shoot this sequence in one night, because it's a lot to cover in 5 hours, and there's action and there's a choreographed fight scene. It's dangerous with the weapons, and again, the actors are doing a lot of their own stunts. We had stunt doubles for them that they wanted to do them and they could do them, and they trained so hard for them. And it was also Allison Duty's last day on set.
That's right.
So we were shooting this at night, this whole sequence in 5 hours, and we broke for 2.5 hours to travel, and then we went to shoot. Coming up, you'll see Allison, they're back in a cave, a different cave. We shot that scene on the same day,
but 3 hours away from
3 hours away from this location. Yeah, so a huge testament to Oliver, because he had to stay focused over the course of 3 days to get to shoot the scene, and then he only had a finite amount of time to shoot it. And I was giving him crazy direction. I had him do the scene like 15 different times to gauge different reactions, because I knew I was going to have to piece it together a little bit with editing, because we're cutting away, and I didn't, even though I'd storyboarded the scene based on the dialogue. Oh, this was great. Actually, I'm great on the camera on this one. Yeah, it was a really great time. We were up on this huge hill. It was crazy. No, but like Oliver really had to keep it together, and man, he did. To this day, we've become really great friends. And
he does some great work throughout the movie, and I remember the some of the first reactions that we got from our brain trusted people that we showed the movie to were like, love that character. He's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the Bohun character, and because of, this is what I always say, that an actor's taken over the role and they made it their own. It's I can't see another actor playing Bohun now, and again, Oliver won this role. He auditioned for it. He got it. He crushed it. He was the best person for the role. But there were different variations of Bohun in the casting process. And even when I first imagined him, it was a little different. And then when I saw Oliver and we talked and he did the scene and we worked it out, like he really worked hard.
He's a land pirate.
He's
amazing.
Great. And we spent a lot of time in prep, and even on the days, he would come, either I would go to his room or he'd come to my room, and we would talk over the scenes, my apartment in Kiev. We'd work the scenes. All the actors, actually. We did this for almost the first month and a half, 2 months. Almost every evening, like every we had 1 day off. We were shooting like 6 day weeks or something crazy, or at least I was. They weren't always on set every day, but they would come on my day off and we would run their scenes, and as a group, almost like a table read every single time. And I really appreciate that, because we didn't have a lot of time on set to like figure it out. Like we had to come ready to go because of the time restraints and how tight everything was. And so anyway, this is the scene I was talking about. This was 3 hours away later. Allison, this is her last night. She literally shot this scene and then left for the airport and was gone. Like contractually, she had to go.
What impressed me about the scene is that it'll catch a very keen eye to see it, but this is actually the same cave or the same set that you used for the bear.
Right.
You just redressed it and relit it to make it appear as this separate cave, and that's part of like the magic of filmmaking is even some of those interior shots of the houses that we saw earlier at Tugars were the same room redressed again to look differently, but like as an audience member, you never see that just because again you and your production team did such a really Allison
just
kills it
and literally and metaphorically kills it.
Such heartbreaking.
She was wonderful here. What you were saying in terms of the set again, Vlad and his team are top notch. I can't wait to work with Vlad again on anything that we do. He's just so great. The key about it is always that if you keep the audience engaged in the emotion and the story, then you can do things like, I mean, people do it all the time anyway, but I really believe if you keep the story and characters and emotion forefront, at the end of the day, audience will buy these kind of tricks. They won't even see them because they're focusing on the story. If they're not focusing on the story, that means I haven't done my job as a director. It means I've failed my actors and my crew and my producers, fellow producers, because that means you're looking around at things that you shouldn't be looking at. But we only had 2 days that weren't on an actual location, that were on a set, and this is the second day, and then we did it on the same day. So coming up here is actually, this is one of the biggest surprises I had on the film, which is Sarenbold, who plays Barunda Khan. He ended up being one of the best experiences I had on set in terms of just as a human being.
He's such
an actor,
badass.
everything.
Look at him.
He doesn't have to do, I mean, literally he just does what he does and you get everything you need.
Now, here's a great bit of like just staging, like, and this is just me bragging on you. He is about 5'8".
He's shorter than that, yeah. He's not as he's huge on screen.
Right. His general that's standing directly behind him in that diamond is like 7 foot tall, and he is just as big as him on screen, both because of the way you've blocked it, but also just his presence is. He's got such a magnetic like thing where you're just watching every little thing he's doing.
Yeah, he's one of those actors where you say that again, what we're talking about, like dialogue. Actors always think dialogue is the way that you act, and for me, a lot of times, again, physicality, face, eyes. Sarenbold as Barunda embodies that aesthetic for me, 100%. Whereas and again, for us to communicate was very hard. But we got to a place, again, originally it was all these translators and all these people between us. By the end of our time together, not even by the end, maybe even within the first few days of our relationship on set together, we were communicating with just hand signals, smiles, big eye. Like, he just understood what I always needed. And on set, he's so menacing as, again, this is a heartbreaking moment for him. And real quick, let's talk about this real fast. This scene was something that I fought really hard for, not because I'm some brilliant genius or anything like that, but the storytelling that I think you and I really wanted to do was, again, a three-dimensional quote-unquote villain. And for me, it was very important that you see that Barunda is just a father, and he's just a father who's lost his son. And because of that, he's going to start to get angry, and he's going to start to want revenge. If his son hadn't died in this way, he would have just bypassed Tuklia and we wouldn't have a movie.
Right.
But they killed his son. So what we were talking about earlier, which is like justification. Yes, the Mongols were a brutal army and they enslaved people, all these things, but they killed his son, and he's making it personal, and he's making decisions that he would not have made. And so for me, that was really important. But going back offset, Sarenbold is the sweetest man you will ever meet. He's such a teddy bear, but he's so great of an actor that you buy it. And this was important here, the connection of everything.
Yeah, and like just the mourning that like the two like the husband and then the father have for their fallen loved one here, and this is just such a beautiful shot of.
So Allison's sitting in this beautiful table of flowers that Vlad and his team created. Robert is killing it with his thing. A big shout out to Vasa, who's our VFX supervisor, who oversaw a lot of our VFX with me. I came up in VFX, so he and I got along really well. But in that scene where Allison's on the table, she held her breath the whole time, and it was amazing. She never broke, but there was a little pulse that you could see in her neck. Just you know, she was alive. And Vasa personally took care of that shot, and it was a shot that was incredibly difficult to do because of the parallaxing with the camera and the scene. And so, again, here, going back to the philosophy of faces can say a lot for you versus all words. And Robert actually did this incredible monologue, and it's amazing. But to me, it was more powerful that we saw just a tail bit of him talking it, but we heard it as a VO, but we saw their faces more than just him saying the words. And it's nothing to take away from his performance of the words because it was brilliant, but I just felt like overall the combination of all the shots together was more powerful than just the monologue.
And this is a nice little combination of practical and CG that you've done here.
Yeah, so we're you know, you and I have always been very fortunate in the fact that we try to keep things as practical as possible. Visual effects have always been a big part of our workflow as well, just because of finances or just storytelling that we're trying to do. I, again, come up in VFX early in my career and continue to this day to do a lot of VFX. I've done a lot of shots in the film as well as a VFX artist, and that was one shot that was very difficult early on. I had to previs the whole thing myself when we were in edit, because that was in the edit it was just a blank, it was a slug as we call it, and it was just a black bar with text. In other productions with a little bit more resources, they would have previs that out before editorial and had it, but we didn't have those resources. So for a long time in the edit, I knew exactly how long I needed that section to be, and we had a black space with words, and then ultimately I just did it myself. I did the previs myself, and then Trekmere, who's the VFX team that ended up doing a lot of our mountain shots for us, and later on the film they'll do a lot of the Sentinel Rock and the dam falling and stuff. Tremendous VFX team, and again, the team that we worked with for a long time. They ended up taking care of a lot of these shots for us, and I really appreciated it because once I turned over my previses to them, they pretty much kept it in line, and they made them better. And that's the thing that you want. You want people around you to make everything you're doing better, because we only are this way. They bring you up to here. So
now this is kind of a seminal scene right here, in that both it is the only scene in the film in which Robert and Tommy share the screen, right?
So technically, in the final edit, this is the only time that they're actually on screen together. It's this sequence. We actually have later on a scene in the gorge that we cut out that they were in the same scene too. Physically,
they look at each other from a distance.
They're in the edit now, but in the actual, we had a longer scene later in the movie where they came face to face. I ended up cutting the scene because it became redundant. There's a scene later where Tugar and Miroslava, or Tommy and Poppy, are in a yurt together, a Mongol yurt, and that scene was more powerful and did the same thing as what we had later on with Tommy and Robert in the gorge. It just became repetitive. But this is, I mean, when you do a movie and again you have Tommy Flanagan and Robert Patrick in the film, you need them to be on camera together.
Yeah, they're icons.
And originally it was very hard for us because in the script they weren't always. I mean, it's just not written for them to be together. It's how it was designed before we had cast. We went back and rearranged this in writing. Rich did a great job of figuring out the scene. We did this rewrite, I think, in Ukraine to make sure that they can end up being at least in a scene together.
One square.
There's a famous thing in Heat where Robert De Niro and Al Pacino are in the diner and they have a scene together, but it's like only over, like shoulder, OTS, over the shoulder, but they're never like in a two-shot really together. And I remember that was a big thing back in the day because they obviously were in the scene, but so I made a point of making sure I shot these two guys, these two, childhood idols of mine, in a, like here as you see it, in a wider two, so that you could see them.
And the other thing that I found really impressive with Tommy is he's a horseman.
Tommy owns his own horse ranch. Right. He when we were in prep for the film, we did a table read at Tommy's house here in California with the American actors, and it was at Tommy's horse ranch, and he was like telling the younger actors, he was like, you should just do all your horse training here. And I was like, I would love that to happen, Tommy, but our Ukrainian crew is waiting for them in Ukraine. But Tommy's like, he's fantastic. The horse he's riding on is actually a retired show horse or something. It was a massive horse too. It wasn't it was big.
It wasn't a regular horse.
It was a beast.
I mean,
a
just
magnificent
standing,
animal.
it's almost as tall as Robert
Yeah,
there.
but I mean, he had full control of this animal. He knows what he's doing, and he's wearing, again, Tonya did a fantastic job with the costumes, and that armor that he's wearing is like a full 30 or 40 U.S. pounds.
That's right.
It was in kilograms there, but I think it ended up being like 35, 40 pounds.
So riding
And
a horse,
he's riding a
wearing,
horse,
like,
and he has to dismount off the horse with it. And this was Tommy's actual first day of shooting as well. So he had come off the plane. He was jet lagged. He was only in the country before he shot the scene, I think, less than
hours, right?
4 hours. He came from the airport to the hotel, from the hotel to the set, and then went through hair and makeup and shot this scene, this particular scene right here.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of it, in the middle of the scene, we had to stop because he was in the middle of his monologue and it started to pour rain. So a lot of the fog that you see in the background constantly is actually natural because of, the environment, the rain, the moisture in the air. It was always there. So
now again, this being one of our first big like fight scenes coming up here, how long did you guys rehearse this?
So real quick, a shout out Pasha and Dima at Stuntalot, who did our stunt coordination. They've been nominated. Our film has been nominated for a Taurus Stunt Award, World Stunt Award,
yeah,
for best stunts in a foreign film.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the same room as like all the big Marvel films and whatnot. So it's a huge testament to those guys. This was our very first day of shooting stunts of any kind, any fights, anything. It was very stressful. Again, I had storyboarded out a lot of this. They had done their own versions of previses and stuff. And again, this was like the beauty of the collaboration between the U.S. and Ukraine in that their original ideas were vastly different than mine. Everything was a little bit more, again, in the 300 world. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. I just personally had a different vision for the film. And I cannot say again how much I am appreciative and respectful and loving towards these guys for trusting my vision on it, because they had planned something else. I loved it, but it didn't fit the tone of the movie I wanted to tell. And they were willing to work with me and rework the scene to do something a little bit more classical in a way. Because again, I didn't want it to become this. And I grew up on these films. I love these films. I didn't want it to become like a wire work film. I wanted it to be something that real people would fight and do. And so, for me, these swords are really heavy and they're big, and the armor things that they're wearing are heavy. And so you have two different types of fighting here. You have a guy, Oleg, who plays our character here, who's really thick and he's big and he's strong, but he's not fast. And then Maxim, who's more like, again, agile. I wanted these fighting styles to come out, but I also wanted them to be based in reality, where in that time period, this is how you would fight. So if you have a big heavy sword, you're swinging a big heavy sword. And if you have a double-handed axe, you're swinging a double-handed axe. And so they really, really wonderfully adjusted to what I wanted in terms of that. And it was, again, not speaking the same language in the beginning, and prep was very difficult. There were days where I was so frustrated because I was like, they don't understand what I want, but they understood and they got it. And this was our first day of shooting for stunts. It was hard. It rained constantly. I think there's a couple shots, if you look really carefully, it's actually raining.
Still raining. Yeah.
And we did a little thing where we kind of removed some of the rain and worked on some stuff with denoising and stuff. But the other part of it is because of the rain, this sequence that you're seeing with Tommy and Robert, you won't know this unless you really know. It's almost in complete darkness that we shot this scene. The sun was setting and had already set, to be honest with you. And we had a couple of 1x1 LEDs on the side and I think a sky panel just to give a tiny bit of like light. But the problem is the fight scene that you see earlier takes place in the middle of the day. But like I told you before, when he comes in on the horse and stuff, there's a huge rain delay. So by the time the rain stopped, we were almost at the end of possible shooting. So we're towing the line right now. We shot on an Alexas, did a ton of Alexas on set and Master Primes, and we are pushing our ASA so high right now. But again, we live in a day and age with technology that we were able to denoise enough that you're not able to tell. And I honestly wanted a more filmic look overall for the film, so we ended up putting grain back into the film. which a lot of people do anyway. I'm not unique in that way, but it actually is one of those situations where everything blended together a little bit. And
It worked out.
yeah, Dima, our colorist in Ukraine, worked very hard with me on this scene to get it to blend in really well.
I feel like this is another scene that Poppy and Alex do a lot with a very little, like in a very short amount of time.
Yeah,
like,
this is
we reestablish their relationship, but then also like talk about his mother, and then like we see that their relationship has like begun to like really take root.
And it was important to one. Poppy as Miroslav is just a superstar. Again, she does so much with so little here. Like again, even though you can't fully see her eyes, just the bottom half of her face does so much work without doing a lot, and it's just incredible. And Alex here, having just like fought, it's a delicate moment because you're talking about your mother who just passed away, but you also have to turn it into a touching love scene.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really delicate balance, and again, they towed that line, and we did it a few different ways, and ultimately they gave me the right choices that we could make it work really well. Again, it was one of those scenes that I feel like we put our foot down and said we needed the scene. One, because Miroslava had been missing from the film now for a while because of all the Mongol stuff, so she disappears from the film, and you need her to come back in to remind again that she's the internal motivation for Maxim. And so she has to be there. And then here we have us going back into laying, kind of like what we call laying the exposition down, laying down the wood for building the house of like really what the third act is going to be. And these scenes are here in general are always hard because you're giving a lot of information, and so you have to do it in a way that people will at least understand and pay attention enough so that later on, because you have to have it somehow. And I don't like doing scenes where we tell you the information. I would have loved much more to show them struggling with like supplies, and I just didn't have the budget for that.
Well, I think too what the really amazing thing about this group of guys that you are working with here is like they so much texture to like their costumes and
their
makeup and
faces,
and like
yeah.
they're all just such incredible actors that regardless of whether you speak the same language of them, you see the intensity and the purpose in which they're driven. And the other thing that I found interesting in getting feedback from people on the film already is the fact that because of the authenticity and the texture and those things that you've spent so much time and detail with your teams developing, a lot of people are like, oh, this is not historically accurate, and that's 100% true. It is not historically accurate. It is a story. It is a historical story, but like there are accurate things in it, but like
right. So we're accurate in terms of and again, testament to Tonya and the costuming and wardrobe team and Alla and Vlad. Like we're accurate in terms of the actual physical things, that a lot of the things they're wearing and doing and stuff. Where we're not accurate is that this didn't actually happen in history. The people sometimes forget that Zakhar Bakut is not a true story.
Right.
It's a fictional tale about a certain time period in Ukrainian history. The Mongols did come and pillage and move.
Well, they were in the Carpathian Mountains.
They came through. They came through.
Were in
yes.
So what now is Poland and
right.
Ukraine, and they were in that area.
But this isn't a true historical story in the fact that like this particular story, there is no Maxim and there is no Zakhar Bakut. They're not real people. Actually, Maxim doesn't even really exist the way he exists in this movie. In the book, Zakhar Bakut, the novel.
There's 5 brothers, right?
Well, there's ultimately, yeah, so we'll get into that in a minute. But like ultimately, Zakhar Bakut, the story is really about Zakhar and again politics of the time. And then the Mongols are an oncoming like outside threat, but it isn't necessarily about the Mongols coming in there. For us, we made the movie about that because again, it made it a more propulsive film because we're now actively involved in a threat. This is one of my favorite shots of the whole film. I storyboarded it out, and then when I saw it in the day, and we were shooting on that day multiple cameras. On some days we were shooting lots of cameras to shorten the shooting day because we had a lot of setups per day. I was doing a tremendous amount of setups, and the minute I saw that, as we were setting up the shot, we slid the camera over, and I saw something, and I asked Yura to slide the camera back over, and he did, and he got that shot, and I was like, with the stand-in, and I was like, this is gonna be a trailer moment. That's great. But it served the story. That also to me felt like that's who Barunda was, like someone who like you come out of the darkness and you see this man and you're just like, oh, I'm in trouble. Interesting enough here again, this all works out for us in the longer edit. There's an actual section of the film that's missing here, and it's a whole 20-some minutes where the brothers actually go and almost like Red Dawn style attack the Mongol army as a group of like 6 guys, a splinter unit. And it's really, we have this incredible action sequence with a fire circle and everything, and you see it in the trailer, and it exists in our longer cut, and it actually came out in the Ukrainian theatrical release, but I ended up cutting it for the international because it was slowing down the film tremendously. As much as it was awesome, I always kind of knew, even when we were in the scripting stage, that section was going to bog down the momentum of the film, because ultimately, as awesome as them being a 6-person unit attacking the Mongol army, it didn't change the story. Right. And ultimately, we cut it out, and if you don't know it doesn't exist, it doesn't change the movie or story, and that's how you know that I probably don't need it. So that's, and for you and I, we talked a lot, many nights, late in the editorial and edit bay, about like, if a sequence doesn't change the breadth of the movie and doesn't truly add to the character, what's the point of the scene except for us being indulgent? And that was a word I think we glued up on the wall. It was like indulgence. Yeah. We cannot be indulgent on this film. And hopefully down our career, if we're lucky enough to continue to keep making movies and people will allow us to make films, we don't forget that. So
this is one of I think really like one of the tent poles as far as the heart of the film, like in explaining kind of the relationship between Poppy's character and Tommy's character, and that like you get a bit of their history, but then you also get a bit of their relationship, in that you saw the respect earlier she had for her father, but now like he's stepped outside the bounds of what she has deemed like, you know, what she's been raised to believe. So now she's challenging the very things that he's raised, like the way he's raised her.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite scenes of the movie, and it was one of the more it wasn't challenging to shoot because, again, they're so wonderful. It was challenging to shoot because I was really short on time on the day, and what we ended up doing is that I had rehearsed it with them, and I knew that once the cameras were rolling, it was going to go. But the problem was we were in this yurt, this Mongolian yurt, and it's a real yurt, like it's legit, but it's not very big. So it's really hard to light it. It's really hard to get the crew in there. It's hard to just
you lit with a practical fire?
No. So what we ended up doing is we took a like LED one by one. There's actually like a multiple 1x1, and I think then again another sky panel, or is either a sky panel or a Fresnel, but basically it's on a flicker timer, so it mimics firelight. But then that's it. They were trying to light, Euro was trying to light the whole thing, and I was like, no, just that. Just give me the fire, and I only want that. And then what I ended up having them do was I had them put 2 cameras in there. I think Euro operated one, and then we had a second operator working on it. And I wanted it to feel like a one-shot, so basically those 2 cameras tracked each other, and I only cut basically when you saw the camera. But I tried to also keep the camera on who was leading the scene in the moment, and then you can see the scene starts where Poppy is like, why would you do this? Tugar takes back, Tommy takes back the power, but then at the end, Poppy takes it back. But then ultimately she is damaged because of what she realizes is happening. This action
was an
scene,
amazing
stunt a lot, stunt team, incredible. Some of my favorite guys, and even like after we were shooting, and I was in Ukraine for a little bit longer after we shot, setting up posts, because we were doing editorial back here in the States. But again, our main home post facility was in Ukraine that was collecting everything I was doing. So I had to set that all up, and the stunt guys are the guys who ended up taking care of me once shooting wrapped. They're the ones who were like, oh, we're going to take you to this restaurant, or we're going to, because I never really got to see Ukraine outside of shooting because we were so busy. I didn't have like 3 days to explore the country during the first stay that I was there. For the first like 7 months I was there because we were shooting and prepping and working, and I didn't have time. And so I had about 3 weeks after we wrapped that I was setting up posts, that they would then show me restaurants and like all the landmarks and stuff. There was the stunt guys that took me out and showed me all that, so that was really cool.
I love Alexi's performance in this. It's just like such like you see like he doesn't want to hurt his friend, and but like again, like you said earlier, no words, he's
just incredible. And again, I not Andre in Ukraine. Andre is a huge actor in Ukraine. He's like a big actor there, huge, one of their best. And again, for him to come and do this film for us and know that he wasn't going to have dialogue, and again, some of that was by design because again his English wasn't that good. He was one of the few people I was like, I'm not gonna ADR on top of. Like, it's got to be him, and he really worked hard on figuring that out. And all the credit goes to him.
I can remember when Tommy came in to do ADR, him commenting specifically on this scene in regards to Sarenbold's performance.
Loved him, yeah.
He was like, you know, I've worked with hundreds of actors, Academy Award winners, all those kind of stuff, and he was like, that dude's the real dude. That dude is incredible.
Yeah, again, we're very fortunate in this film. Sarenbold is one of the biggest actors in Mongolia. I mean, he is Mongolian, and he's one of the top actors there. And we were blessed when he said yes to come do our film. But again, like he and Tommy got along too. It was incredible to see them together on set because
they didn't speak the same language.
Yeah, but they didn't have to. Like They just kind of like. They would just sit with each other and giggle and laugh and have a great time. And again, they couldn't talk. I mean, Tommy had his translator for the Ukrainian side of it. Like if he needed to talk to anyone in Ukrainian, he had a translator. But then he and I would just basically talk, and him and obviously the other American or British actors. But him and Sarenbold would just sit and have a great time. And this scene again, we're in the middle of the night here. It's like again, the sun rises at like 3:30 a.m. in the morning. Actually, I had to shoot the scene twice. The first time I shot the scene, the sun came up. So this scene again is a combination of two different nights. It's combined into one, but like they were just going at it, man. Like they just had a great time, and this is a really hard scene. And this scene to me, early in the editing process, we had one of our brain trusts, a gentleman that we love dearly, that we want to make movies with for the rest of our life, who said like, this was the scene that like solidified the movie for him. And I'll never forget it because I got a lot of inspiration for the scene and how to conceptualize it from Kingdom of Heaven in the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, which is very different than the theatrical release. There's a very powerful sequence where the quote-unquote bad guys come and talk to the quote-unquote good guys, but really you get to see that they're like, there is no bad or good. And for me, that again solidified a little bit of like, I wanted a scene where Sarenbold as Barunda
became human.
Well, just again, is like, you do what you do and we do what we do, and there is no right and wrong here. It's just that we have to survive. And human nature is always fighting to survive and protect itself. And we're in a place now in the world where things are rapidly changing, and I would like to think that like we, again, historically it's not necessarily in the movie, but like that as a my take on the material, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah, something as far as this little sequence of shots that I was always impressed with. Tommy wasn't on set.
Tommy never physically saw this fort, his home.
He shot on green screen, and you guys
in a forest
mapped in the background of that entire scene.
In the same forest that he's talking to Barunda in the scene before, we built a green screen tent, and he shot this scene, his monologue for this scene in that forest, maybe 2 months before we shot this scene. The reason is because we had to physically build Tugar's house.
Twice, right? Because you...
Well, it's two different ways. We built the entire structure that you see now, but that didn't get finished towards closer to the end of shooting. So Tommy was already gone by this point.
Get ready.
And then the interior scenes that you see him in the beginning of the film with Miroslava, that's actually Zakar's house, rebuilt to look like Tugar's house. Then we rebuilt it as Zakar's house. He shot his interior scenes there. Then we remade that interior scene when we rebuilt the house built the house for real. And so he physically never got to see his own quote-unquote house.
And didn't his compound halfway burn down, right?
Well, so we burned this. So what you're seeing now is a combination of real fire, like this is all real fire in the background, and like later on at the end of the scene, like this is all real fire.
Those are practical fires.
Practical fire. And then later on in the real scene, you'll see the interior of this house burning, and that's real. And so we augment it a little bit here and there with some CG when needed, but it's almost 95% real.
And then part of the set actually did get burned, didn't it?
So the interior of that house is burned, and then we had to do a pickup shot, and they fixed it, and then and pickup shot in the same principal photography, so they did it. And then the village that you saw, Uncle Karoon's village, that's a separate thing that they built and then built down so that we could have proper, and it was incredible. Yeah, I was amazed. And we also in the Carpathian Mountains went to see the funeral fire for Rada. That's a real fire that we shot, from
Not the drone.
not the drone. It was it was pretty amazing.
Something that's, I mean, Alex is so great, like physically here as far as both the actors here, but when it gets back to his brother here, giving him two swords, he's such a physical presence, just both his physique, but also like as an actor, like he just exudes such confidence, and like I always saw like his older brother character as such like a reflection of Robert's character as Zakar
As a young man.
Such that like even more so than what Alex was doing, which was like kind of a combination of his mother and father.
Right.
As somebody who comes from a very close family, like it was interesting to see that dynamic, of mother and father combined into their children, like show itself on screen so very clearly.
And again, Alex and Rocky actually, for all of the shooting, principal photography, lived together, and so they really offset became brothers too, and they trained together, even in prep before they came to Ukraine, and we prepped here a little bit. They trained together. They really did form this really great bond, and early on in the film, Rocky's character is in a lot of ways the lead male for the first half of the film. He plays the more traditional quote unquote hero character, and he's great at it, and it's a testament to Rocky as an actor that he understood that this wasn't actually his movie. As an actor, that it's the story belongs to Maxim, and so therefore it's Alex's film as the lead male character. And Rocky was the most generous actor in that way, because a lot of times with actors you can run into a problem where like every actor is kind of looking out for themselves kind of thing. It takes a lot of self-awareness to know that, understand that, and service that part of the story. And as a director, it's an incredible thing, because actors' jobs are to worry about actors' jobs, like to worry about their role, and they have to focus on their role. They can't be worrying about some other character's role. That's my job. And for Rocky to understand what his role was and how it fit into the overall story that I wanted to tell is a blessing. I mean, he made my life so easy on set with those kinds of, because those are hard conversations you can have with actors sometimes, where you're like, listen, this isn't about you right now. This scene, it isn't about you. This is about someone else. And so he was great about that. And this goes again, here's a really important moment. It's kind of a callback that we set up in the montage early in the film with the axe throwing. It's kind of why we have it, is that we wanted it to feel like he would actually
feel like he could make a difference here.
Yeah, and that the axe would get there. But this is also his like quote unquote final sin on Maxim's side, his arrogance, thinking that he could do this, and ultimately he pays the ultimate price for his own arrogance, in that he thinks individually he can end this war, but he can't end this war by himself. He has to end this war through the power of the group, which again goes back to the theme of legacy of family and whatnot, that you need the entire family to win. I mean, unfortunately, he has to sacrifice his brother here because of his bad decision.
Now, something that was really cool, that even just in the details of that arrow head is actually made of a piece of like jade sticking out of a snake's mouth.
Yes.
that is holding
Yeah,
the,
'cause-
like it is just so detailed, and you never see it on camera.
Yeah.
But the detail of like my special arrow, he's got like a snake head with holding a piece of. It's wicked.
My intention always was that we were going to have a scene where that we spent more time really explaining that Garunda had these special arrows that were like poison tipped, and then that ultimately it still plays in the movie, but it's not. I didn't have the time editorially to make the point.
Sure.
I was going to make this whole thing, and then when Zakar gets hit by the arrow at the end of the film, it's the same set of arrows. However, it became a thing because, like, to tell that story, it got in the way of so many other things. It was elongating. Just it was a thing I was trying to do that didn't ultimately pay off enough to matter. So I had to chop it, and I chopped it pretty early on in editorial.
Yeah.
It never even made it to like the extended version of the film or whatever. But that was always the intention. But I kept the shot in there because even though I didn't go into it, I think for the most part for the audience they understand this. There's something different about this arrow.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately the most important intention of the scene.
And I think too, like even with the background of the detail of that, like the shot that we're about to see coming up of them riding into Tuklia after they have this conversation.
It clarifies, yeah.
Well, it also just it shows like the amount of detail that is put into like the planning of everything, like from the totems that are in Tuklia to like they came from a different time period and religious belief than we did. They were pagan, even.
Yeah.
And like there's Christian belief in what Tugar had, and then the Mongols had their own belief, and so it's like this culmination, and really this. The Ukraine as a whole is this big mixing pot of different cultures that have been through that area.
For
throughout
Eastern
time.
Europe, it's a huge
Yeah.
mixing pot. Yeah. Originally in the script, there was a lot more, and again, this is the preferable general audience 2-hour cut. In our longer, like 230, 240 cut, there's a little bit more time spent on like religion in general. But ultimately, again, if we strip it out of the film, it doesn't take it away. We did spend a lot more time. So that was a big part in the original meeting between Robert and Tommy and the horses in Tuklia. It was a much longer monologue sequence, and it was about a lot of it was about religion, about pagans, being a pagan versus being a Christian, things like that. And that's very important stuff in Ukraine, and I understand why it's important. But from a cinematic point of view, that wasn't the story I was trying to tell. I wasn't trying to make a movie that was like harping or focusing on religion in general. This isn't for me the vehicle that was that. This was more, again, a vehicle to talk about what family means to me and why.
And I think
And
this
so-
scene is a great example of
Yeah.
that. And I think even in terms of like the lack of dialogue and the amount of information that's being passed between father and son here, it's really powerful.
Yeah, this is like week 2 of shooting. Again, everyone was just trying to find their feet. It's one of the. This is probably ultimately my favorite scene in the movie completely. Rocky just went there. Everyone on set went there. Alina comes in a little bit. She goes there. Bhushan, Mika, who plays the little boy here. All of it just. If you actually ever get to see the raw edit, I think at the end of it I yell cut and I go, "That's how you do it. Like that's a scene. That's a real scene. That's a perfect scene." It's very rare in my short, minuscule career that I've had this experience where like a scene when you're shooting it and it just works. And we had multiple cameras this day, so I was lucky. So I was getting the reactions and the action at the same time for most of it, and I think almost all of it. And so. This is almost like generally a one take that you're just getting the multiple angles, but I had the cameras on, and again, it was all driven by Rocky being prepared as an actor. He came in prepared. Alina came in. This was her first day of shooting, so she had, again, English isn't her native language. I didn't end up ADRing her. I kept
She
her,
was great.
and we can talk a little bit about accents in a second, but like, that's her day one. That's her experience to this movie.
I feel like that was a reoccurring theme with you, like day one, whether it was your day one or the actor's day one. It was always like
It's just it was a
throwing
very
it right into the lion's den.
Yeah, it was just this was a very intense film to make. Again, Misha just killing it. Yeah, he's just He's just great. And again, sorry, sometimes you'll hear us say different names. In Ukraine, everyone has kind of multiple names. So I said Misha. That's what I called him on set, but Micah is his real name.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone kind of has like a Ukrainian, but also like a Russian name because they speak Ukrainian and they speak Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the names for me intermix. I end up calling them both names, and they respond both ways. So, sorry, it's Misha, Micah. So this is all one take. This shot of him and the shot of Rocky, it's all one take.
Cross shooting.
I'm just cross shooting here,
Right.
and then I have another one for the master if I need it. And this is all stuff that we worked out briefly in rehearsal with the toys and stuff. In the longer edit, the toys become a much bigger thing. They become a totem in the longer edit. We make a big point about what the toys mean. In the shorter edit, we don't spend as much time on it. But I think it's still pretty effective
I think
ultimately.
he's still, it brings forward the emotion of the moment as far as the child wanting to, connect with his
Yeah.
father and then not,
Well, and also just again the
I don't-
sacrifice of like war.
Mhm.
Like defending your village means defending your family, but also means families lose family members. And we live in a day and age right now where sometimes for us in the U.S. we're a little removed from the day-to-day in war. But in Ukraine, while we were filming this movie, they're in active war, technically with Russia at the moment, and so for some of them, it's very real for them. Although we were very safe while we were filming the movie and stuff, for a lot of the Ukrainian crew and for a lot of the Ukrainian extras and actors and stuff, war is a really personal thing. And for them, this movie was very personal because they have been occupied with Crimea and stuff. So it's a very political thing for them. Again, I can't pretend to understand fully their plight because I'm not
Sure.
living it every day, but I can understand the feeling of war and what it can do for you because I am a first generation American product of a war. Like
Mhm.
my father fought in a war, so yeah. Here, one of my favorite days on set, and I'll tell you why. This is the time where actors do like anything they can to get a rise out of them. And here, Alex is whispering, saying he's not actually emotional in this moment. He was being a jokester, and Poppy is in the most like sad moment, and he like in her ear on the microphone. You're like, is he really just telling her jokes right now? But the scene works.
Sure.
It's at the end of the day, it looks great, and the intentions get across.
Something that I think a couple of people have brought up, like as far as Alex is concerned, he starts off as such a boy, in like as a true younger brother, kind of like the youngest of this family, and like slowly throughout the movie, like whether it be through death and having to become more mature through that, or whether it become just like understanding the responsibility of taking care of those around you, like he really embodies the hero character and takes that mantle throughout this movie, like slowly, whether it be like Ivan passing and his mother passing and now like standing shoulder to shoulder with like his father.
So the backstory is that one, Alex is just a great actor, but two, so Alex wasn't actually supposed to play Maxim.
He had worked with Robert on another movie, right?
Yeah, but even before that, I had actually cast Alex to play a character called Roman, which was the middle brother. There was actually Maxim, Roman, and Ivan. And we had actually cast, I won't bring it up in the conversation now, but we had actually cast another actor to play Maxim, and he was great, and I loved him, and the three of them together were great. And then what ended up happening is contractually, we got schedule-wise messed up with the rain and the weather and all this kind of stuff, and so the other actor wasn't able to get out of a contract that he had to start another project, so he had to leave the project. I then went to London and met with another actor, cast him. He was wonderful, was going to play Maxim. He was unable to do the part. About a week before production, we cast another actor to play Maxim. Wonderful.
Maxim 3.
Maxim 3 was wonderful. Had it, everything was great. I really liked this choice as well. And then he ended up having to leave the project because he was doing a David Lynch project, and it didn't work out. So I didn't have a Maxim. I was already in Ukraine at this point, and prepping the film, and I had already done all the casting when I was in the U.S. But now here I am in Ukraine, and I don't have a Maxim. And so one night, after a long, I think we had a long conversation. A lot of us, Raja, our other producer, American producer, Raja Collins, had a long conversation. And I called Alex, and he'd been prepping to play Roman. And I said, I'm going to cut your part. I'm going to cut Roman out of the movie, and you're going to play Maxim. And I'm going to merge Roman in, because the original Maxim character was different. And I'm going to merge part of Roman, half of Maxim, and then I'm going to give part of Maxim to Ivan. And that's why I said earlier, part of Ivan plays like the hero character in the first half, because that's actually part of the Maxim role. But it was not how it's supposed to be, but sometimes when things aren't supposed how they're supposed to be, it works out for the best. Alex ended up embodying, like I said about Oliver becoming Bohun, I can't see another Maxim now. I only see Alex playing Maxim. In Ukraine, Alex is like on beer bottles, and like he is a symbol of like he's become an icon for them over there. I honestly I remember I called him. I was in my apartment in Ukraine, and I called him on the phone. He was here in the U.S. and I was like, listen, just get on the plane and come here. We'll figure out, because there's contracts and all these things that you have to work out, all the business of making films. I was like, but just get on this plane. Trust me, I will make this work. Rich and I spent through, so then we had all, we were still prepping the film. We ended up rewriting the film, and God bless Rich Ronat, really fantastic writer who just can write so fast. We ended up rewriting a large majority of the film a week or so before. I mean, it was literally like the week before shooting to accommodate this huge change. And Alex came to set and figured it out with me. Every day we rehearsed the scenes. Like I said, after shooting, he would come to my apartment and rehearse scenes. On days off, we would rehearse scenes. Him and Rocky worked together. Him and Poppy worked together. It was nonstop. And again, they have incredible chemistry together. And you can't say enough as a director. That's 99% of your battle is chemistry.
Right.
If they don't have chemistry, we have no movie. And here we have this scene, and they do. And again, I'm blessed that I have such a wonderful cast. I was blessed that I have a really cool crew. I'm blessed that I had you and Raja supporting me here in the States. My wife, who now is my wife at the time, my girlfriend, who every day I would have to video in. We were on such random time zone differences because you guys were here in the States and I was in Ukraine, and it's just insane. But these actors also became my family. This movie's about family, and ultimately this cast and this crew became my family while I was making this film. And so it kind of bleeds through.
Now, do you often subject your family to freezing temperatures and when they're
it was very cold when they did this love scene. It was probably it was Celsius then, but again it was close to maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit when we shot it, and we were by this lake, and it was a very hard scene to shoot. It was one of those scenes too where communication, that's an inside joke that you'll have to message us directly and we'll explain. But that was a hard scene to shoot also because how I envisioned the scene and the look of it was a little different than maybe what the crew, even though we had talked about it a lot, it was on the day, it was really difficult. So we made it work, and everyone really came together on that. I'm very thankful for that, because it could have been really hard with the situation and the type of content you're shooting. Again, Robert, fantastic eyes. I mean, you can't, those are real. Those are him.
Yeah, that's not a whole lot of...
And I want to say real quick, this is Stas. He plays a character, Sokil. And I want to say this because in our longer edit, Sokil is actually a much bigger part of the film. And Stas is just a superstar in his own right. He can play 10 instruments. He's an incredible singer, dancer, just an amazing entertainer. I had to cut back his part a little bit because when we re-edited the film to make it a little bit more paced better, his sections ended up getting cut. But I want,
not for lack of talent.
No, I want to give a shout. He was probably if you were to go pound for talent, one of the more talented people.
He's really good.
On Earth. So I just very impressed with him. We'll give a shout out here too. These were very difficult sequences for us to do too, because here we've moved into our gorge sequence, which is all of our third act. And these horses and stuff, I want to give a shout out to Ironclad, who did the VFX here for the horse stuff, because it was incredibly difficult to do. And just the time on it was very short for us. This whole gorge thing was built. We're on location, but they built these walls. It's now actually a tourist attraction here. People come and see it. They've been shooting commercials in it. All sorts of things. It was built for our film.
Backstage tour.
Yeah, Vlad built it for our film. And, to be honest, originally I had thought about maybe doing the whole thing with CG, the backgrounds, not to say on the level of Mandalorian, but like in that way. Because this didn't exist. This didn't exist in the Carpathian Mountains. This is what we needed. But Vlad ended up building it for me, and it looks incredible. It looks better than if I had been able to create it in CG. Now, not to say there wasn't some CG work put into it, augmentation stuff, and the VFX teams that worked on that deserve all the credit for doing that. But ultimately, 95% of it is practical. It helps.
Now, one of my favorite things when we were in post-production on this, and I would see the dailies coming back from this particular these shots here, is you holding a camera standing in front of 100 charging Hun warriors screaming.
Yeah.
Run!
So again, part of this is that these are very, some films can take many days to shoot scenes like this. Fortunately, I had a good amount of shooting days. I'm not complaining about those, but I didn't have a lot of days to shoot these action sequences. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these, again, I storyboarded out and I had shot for the end. Basically, I knew that these scenes would be this long, and so I would only shoot the parts that I needed because we just didn't have the resources to shoot more. Part of it also required that we had to have a lot of cameras on set, but then again, language barrier was a huge problem. And by the time we got to this point in the movie, we were very well into the end of our filming. Everyone was just tired. So a lot of these shots, again, Yura and his team, the camera team, were doing fantastic work. But again, you and I came up in a world of filmmaking where we made everything ourselves, and I DP'd a lot of our early work together. And so I ended up shooting a lot of these sequences too, with the help of the camera crew, obviously prepping me and stuff. But because it was faster for me to just be able to get the shots I needed, because I knew how much we needed for the edit, because I'm also editing the film, and so I was in the middle of this a lot of times.
It was wild. It was fully armed enemies running at
And this part, shooting action like this is very different than shooting acting scenes per se. And now, granted, we didn't have a second unit team. I didn't splinter off. We didn't have a second unit team. We all were kind of I just did all this first unit because of, again, the resources I had. But the difference really for me is that in action scenes, in dialogue acting scenes, you're really just trying to get the actors. It's all about the actors. I talk to my actors actively on camera, but not when they're in the scene. I don't try to scream at them to do something while they're in the acting mode. And in action scenes, it's a lot like a choreographed dance. And I've done a lot of music videos. We have done a lot of videos too with choreographed theatrical dance and that kind of stuff.
There's a rhythm to it.
There's a rhythm to it, so it's like a dance, but in it you can also yell out things to actors, because a lot of the sound effects and dialogue aren't going to get done in post, because you can't use the production sound from this in the day. And we had a really wonderful sound location sound team, but you can't use the sound from this because it's all these extras and all this fighting and they're clinking and hitting, and you can't. So I was able to then have a camera in my hand, shoot the scenes that I wanted, but also yell at the actors I need you to be move to the right now, and then I would whip pan to them or something crazy like that, or here with Alex, I could physically tell him what I needed him to do, and he would just do it, and I could just keep the camera running for a second and get it and then move on versus cutting and resetting, because it was faster that way.
And I think that helps with the intimacy of even a large battle scene like this, to be able to be boots on the ground, standing right next to the emotion of what's happening, because you catch looks like this, Robert,
and that's the most important part about a lot of fight scenes and action scenes are fantastic, and I just wish I could shoot those scenes too. But for me, if you don't have the emotion in the scene and the storytelling, then all the flash doesn't matter. And like we also shot here a really awesome oneer with Alex where he goes on this like video game rampage style killing of all these Mongols, and it's awesome. It's like this really cool one shot. But again, it didn't tell more story, and it didn't give emotion, and stylistically it didn't fit. And so like again, those are things that like as you're shooting and directing and producing and editing movies, and you know, whether they're the biggest films you've ever made or the smallest films you've ever made, I think you have to take those into consideration. What's the storytelling? And for us, one of the things that really took, you know, again, I edited all of these action sequences knowing when I shot them how they were going to kind of put together, and it was really dangerous because if it didn't work, then I didn't really have a lot of coverage to fix it because we didn't have those days. And I say that, and yet the whole third act we did shoot for like 3 weeks, but the problem is we only had certain actors on certain days, so a lot of these scenes where they feel like they're like, here Robert's with them even though he's like technically geographically behind them a little bit. Robert was only on for these action sequences. Robert was only there for like 2 days,
Right.
so I had to get all of Robert's stuff right away, and then focus on another actor who might only be there for, and so it's really disjointed. And again, I give a lot of testament to everyone who worked with us who trusted that like I wasn't just making it up.
Right.
But I mean, there were days where like I would go home. I can remember calling you or calling my wife and just crying on video chat because I was like, this is the hardest thing we've ever done. Like how is this all going to come together? Like everyone's expecting this to work, and yeah, I think it's going to work but I don't know until we edit it properly. And even like this is shot months beforehand, but it's all connected. And again, with a combination of Vasa, who's the VFX super, the ADs, Natasha and Dasha, a lot of them were hands-on with me in terms of understanding this. Julia, who was my script supervisor, who really took care of a lot of continuity things and really asked me hard questions to make sure, like, 'cause she wouldn't understand some days, and then I would have to defend what I was trying to do, and then by doing that, she really forced me to make sure I knew what I was saying. So,
Yeah,
huge
especially,
amount
like,
of shout outs to her for that.
The ability to translate it in a way that like non-native speakers are able to both understand the
Yeah.
dialogue, but
Yeah.
also just like the story points to be able to like
And-
move forward.
And I should say this too. Again, I had a bunch of translators, but my main translator, Leo, who ended up not only just being my translator, but also like my main assistant, and like just took care of my day-to-day life for the many months that I was in Ukraine. Leo, or Lonya, his Ukrainian name, was essential to this process because again, my head of departments didn't really speak English. So Lonya, I would have to tell Lonya, and Lonya would have to tell them. And by the end of it, we were all kind of talking, but like without Lonya, I mean, I would have been in a lot of trouble because like no one would have really understood what I was trying to do. And so I really am thankful for that. This little girl, a little Easter egg, this is one of the Ukrainian producers' daughters, and I have to give it to her. This child was great. She really wanted to play the part. She got it. She has the cat. That cat, that cat loved her, and I think at a certain point she was done with the cat. You know, like saying like you're shooting a movie, it's not that easy, and but she gunned up and did it.
And this is one of the scenes where it just started raining, but like.
Well, it
you
rained.
made
It rained.
it.
Yeah, so it rained in Tommy's approach on the horses, and it just wouldn't stop raining. And so we had shot the other scenes already, and
So you added a little digital rain.
we
and
had
some
to just
thunder,
we just had to
and
we had
made
to
it
just
like a little passing storm.
we just had to blend it all together. We had some practical water thrown in with CG water and smoke, and we just had to make it all work because.
That's it.
And then narratively, we just go, listen, it's raining in this section, and this is Ukraine. Like, it rains, and then it stops raining. So by the time we get to the next one, it's not as prevalent. So,
And Alex really wanted to do.
so Alex does almost every single one of his stunts. The only stunt I would not let him do was the net. And it still looks like Alex, but I would not let him do that because the two horses were racing at him at a very high speed, and I just could not. On my own
You couldn't
conscience.
afford to lose him.
I just couldn't risk it. I just didn't. I knew the stunt team had it and they wouldn't have an issue, but I just couldn't risk it. So that was the one time that I told him no, and he really wanted to do that scene.
And again, just a really good example of a scene where nobody says anything and it's just a bunch of looks.
In the script, we have a lot of dialogue here. We actually have a whole dialogue sequence here, and it's a lot more. I ended up stripping it all out in editorial because, again, for me, I think looks are more important, and it's just more elegant form of storytelling. At the end of the day, cinema is really just pictures. Dialogue came after. So I appreciate dialogue, and dialogue is so important. Don't get me wrong. I don't want anyone to think that I don't care about dialogue. But my preference is, if I can show you versus tell you, I'm going to do the show as much as I can. So we're moving in here. Obviously, Sarenbold comes back in. And one of the things that I wanted to say that was important for this entire sequence was that he's justified in wanting to murder and kill Maxim here because he's killed his own son. But I still needed the scene to feel menacing and scary for tension's sake and, for the sake of the movie. And my concerns ultimately in the beginning were that it would be really hard to balance it out. But because Sarenbold himself is such a great actor and is able to just do what he does without a lot of extra, it just works. Because he comes off as being like vindictive and angry and menacing. But you realize at the end of the day, if someone killed your son or your daughter, you might also be a little, a little aggressive. At the same time, on a production level, this was a really interesting day. We actually practically burned part of this is Zakar's house, and then augmented the rest with CG. But we had to be careful because if we actually burned down the house, we would have been in trouble. We needed this house. We weren't done with shooting the house.
Yeah, we still had to film interiors on the...
So we still needed... This was all practical. We actually did burn this on the exterior, and I thought that was great because I didn't know that we could do that. So I was planning for it to be VFX, and then they were like, "Oh, we'll do it for real."
This shot, how many horses do you guys have on?
Yeah, so Oleg, who is our horse wrangler team, he owns an award-winning Ukrainian horse team, like around the world. They've won all these competition stuff. So they provided us all the horses. Any given day it could be 500 to 300, 50 to 300, depending on the scenes and stuff. And so that's kind of how it worked. Now we're moving into the last half of the movie, the second bit of the movie. Yeah, and this is a lot of this stuff is practical mixed with CG. I got to give a big shout out again. It's a combination of Postmodern Digital did these shots with The Rock with Vassar's VFX Super. They coordinated a lot, and then later on, Trekmere takes care of the rest of the Rock shots. So we had to split things up amongst different teams because, again, we had such a short period of time to accomplish everything, but we had a lot of VFX shots to do.
Now, how many VFX shots were there total in the film?
In this cut, in the actual final release international version, I think ultimately there ends up being close to like 800-ish. In the extended version, there's more that we finished and whatnot. And again, maybe one day people will get to see those. They're really well done. But again, I think ultimately we're looking at how to make sure the film is released properly. Right? But even again, a lot of the shots that in the additional and even in this version we call invisible VFX, which is you shouldn't notice that we did VFX shots at all. So here, like, we extended walls or extended parts of the gorge. You shouldn't know that we did that. Some of the stuff here, almost all of this is real, but like some of the dust is VFX, and that counts as something I had. Some of it isn't. Like, that actually wasn't VFX. That was pure real dust. And so, you'll have to see how you always try your best to blend everything together so it's seamless.
I think one of the other actors that I haven't mentioned that I'm just a huge fan of in the movie is this other Mongolian.
Erjan, who plays
He's captain, yeah. Such a great performance. And Poppy here with her physicality, not only like with the bow and arrow, like you had said that she was probably the best shot on set.
Oh, by far, yeah.
But like she's like in there holding her own against like three like full grown armored up guys.
Poppy again is just the ultimate professional. There's an extra few scenes that she had that were action based. She was getting assaulted in one scene and had to do this like really crazy survival type fight, which I loved. But it didn't ultimately service the story. We didn't really need it at the end of the day, so I ended up cutting it from the final release version. But she trained so hard for these, and like it's so effortless. And the guys and her, I mean, she would win every competition with them in terms of marksmanship, and even just some of the stunt work. And it's no slight on them. It's just that that's how good she was,
Sure.
you know. And they loved it. They treated her as if, I mean, she was like the person they were chasing, the carrot, you know. So they enjoyed it. Oliver here too, same thing. Like, I mean, this broadsword that he's swinging, sometimes it's a real sword that weighs a lot, and then sometimes it's a prop sword. But like, you can't really tell when and where that is. But for him, he had to like do that. He had to like treat the sword the same either way, and so he really committed to that. And that thing could be dangerous. So if he's not careful, people could really get hurt. This stunt here, even for Alex, it seems so simple. It's actually very dangerous. We were very careful and everything, but there's a lot of horses running by him, and he's on the ground. And again, it's your lead actor. You have to be careful. Here you go, Poppy again. And again, granted, there was a bigger scene here. Actually, originally, her and Erjan actually got into a fight.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up cutting it down shorter because ultimately, yes, she holds her own, but she's going to end up on the ground ultimately. And for me, it was important to get to this part and make it more about this. And this isn't, I want to make this clear, this isn't like she's being quote-unquote rescued by a guy. I don't want anyone to ever mistake this. This is actually more just closing off the story loop for Bohun, which is Bohun had a wife and child that he wasn't able to protect, and it haunted him for life. And in a mirror world, him killing Erjan here, Merke, is completing that loop. He's able.
Yeah,
to,
he's
it's more
his
for his
adopted family. He's
Right.
now been able to participate
Right.
in there.
So it doesn't matter who was on the ground there. It could have been anyone. It just happened that we, for the story, needed Miroslav on the ground.
And this is our Samson moment.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
100%.
Like he, pulling down the pillars, and I think for as little as he says in the movie, like this moment really pays off his character. Like as far as like
We again really worked hard and wanted to make sure that at least we did our damnedest to make sure that every character had a complete arc. That they just weren't in the story to be in the story, service. Again, they are servicing other characters and whatnot sometimes, but like, we wanted each character to kind of have their own mini. And so Petra, we made a really conscious choice. This wasn't actually part of the original script. It's just something that I asked Rich to put into the script. Really had to fight with the producers that Petra would be the one that put down the rock, because normally in movies your hero character is the one who's doing this, and sometimes you have another character that's sacrifice. But ultimately, when you think about it, Petra is the one who defeats the by putting down the rock.
yeah, it's really a team.
It's a team effort, and that's again goes back to the theme of the movie, which is like you need your entire thing in order to accomplish what you're trying to do, and that's what happens here. Tracking these shots of a wonderful job. Really appreciate it.
No,
Collaboration.
something that we discussed before about this sequence here, as far as the sound, part of what sells this entire sequence is both the sound design, but also like the choices you made in regards to sound.
Yeah, so for sound, we have a really wonderful sound team led by Max, really great guy who's worked on a lot of productions. He had actually lived in LA for a little while. The overall sound department at Postmodern, which he and I got along swimmingly. I wish I had been able to spend more time with him, because mixing and editing sound is one of my favorite things to do on a film. But again, with Josh Ashley as our composer and his wonderful team, Josh was able to understand what I always wanted to do. I had scored a lot of our earlier films, but I no longer score films anymore for us. And Josh came to us. We had worked with someone else previously that we loved dearly, but was unavailable for this. And Josh had worked with Hans Zimmer, came to us highly recommended, I think from Raja. And I just loved him from the day we met. And one of the things Josh and I talked about was this sequence with the whole dam. Originally, we talked about having score in it, but then ultimately I was like, I think it just needs to be sound design. And Josh 100% bought into that. And, again, he sculpted all of the score around that. So that you have score before and after, and it's also beautiful. And everything for us was about motifs. Lately, the trend in music has been everything is more ambient type music, and I love that, and we've used that ourselves in some of our earlier stuff recently. But for this film, I wanted to harken back to kind of the epics motifs were very important to me, and I wanted the interplay between motifs. I said earlier in this commentary how if you just could watch the music without anything but the music, it tells its own story, and that was very important to me. And Josh and I really spent a lot of time talking about that, and he did such incredible work with such little time, because normally you want your composer to have more time. I want to physically be there with him and work with him on it. I was for the last half of we did half of the score while I was still in LA and doing edit, and then I went back to Ukraine to finalize the film, and we did the rest of the score while I was in Ukraine. So we did it remotely in the middle of the night. I was on before Zoom, I was on Hangouts or something, and we would do it in the middle of the night. And then we did the orchestration. We did that remote. He was on remote, and Sergey in the Ukrainian National Orchestra, I was physically there with them, and they did that. It was incredible. But this sequence here is, again, the score is so good. It's so important because it's telling Tugar's story without us having to use dialogue.
And I think too, the how this sequence came together, just from a visual standpoint of the CGI, of the rushing water being put in there, but also I remember an earlier version of the script, Tommy coming to you and saying, hey, I feel like Tugar in his kind of arc needs this
heroic redeeming moment.
Redeeming, that's the word.
Yeah, we had a talk about it over lunch, and Tommy had some really great suggestions.
And so you and he kind of developed this last kind of stand of Tugar.
We understood what it was, and then I gave it to Rich, and Rich kind of worked it out, and then it came back to me again once we had to rewrite for the Maxim character, and then we refined it right before Tommy came. And yeah, all of this is a combination of practical and effects. It was really interesting. We built this platform, and then there's the practical walls, but then there's green screen on the ground and green screen on some of the walls, and then it was a really interesting thing to shoot. And I was fortunate we had done things like this, you and I, before on other projects, so I had an understanding of it, but it enabled us to be free on the day. Here, he actually hit him.
And one of my favorite things about this is when this particular scene was being edited together, we were discussing the fact that it's a ballet of death. Barunda is such just a force. He's moved across the entire world, and now he's up against this young guy who just doesn't stand a chance, except for the fact.
Yeah, it was important. It was important to us, because again, big boss battles at the end of the movies are part of cinematic language, and we expect them, and we wanted to give you that after these big 100,000 people fighting things. We wanted kind of a one-on-one to bring it back intimate, because again, this is an intimate story. But what I wanted to do was have it that Barunda is such a badass that he underestimates Maxim, and he whoops Maxim. It's only at this last minute, through a combination of the entire movie's knowledge, that Maxim has to learn, that he's able to then win here. And I think originally when I edited it, I actually had the scene longer, and it was a little bit more drawn out, and it was great, and it built up the tension really well. But I think ultimately it felt too on the nose. And so I think we were editing really late at night. You were over that day working really hard with me, just giving me really great feedback. And I think we landed on this version of the scene where the edit was a little quicker at the end with him killing him, but it was just, again, in time with the music and whatnot. It felt like it was just really cathartic. It was also important for me that everyone knows that him killing Barunda isn't actually the climax moment. It's him pulling the necklace off of Barunda is actually the real climax of it. So if you actually hear the music is climaxing there, not on the kill, because the necklace represents everything. It represents his family, his mother, the sacrifice, his brother, all of that. So for me, it
started the whole domino.
It's really the symbol, the token that I used for myself as the movie. So that's really for me the climax. Now, not everyone may see it that way, and you're always open to your own interpretation, but that's how I intended it. Here again, first day of shooting, last scene of the movie, incredibly scary when you're doing it that way, but it worked out for us.
Yeah, because you have like practical effects like the scars on his arm that you guys hadn't even planned. Like you guys hadn't even got into the fight choreography to get those scars. But yet.
Yeah, usually it's a very interesting way that it all came together. But Ala did a really great job here setting it up, and then we ultimately then had to follow this and figure out this later. And again, that's the nature of making film. It's never going to be the perfect situation. If you're waiting for the perfect situation to make your film, you're probably never going to make it. So
Robert in this scene,
yeah, and he crushed it. This was again from day one. Everyone was just getting to know each other in between takes, or even in some of the close-ups of Alex. Robert was hilarious. Like here, off camera, Robert's like telling him jokes, like because there's no dialogue. And even though we're running sound, Robert knows that, and he's such a veteran of film. So he was telling jokes to Alex, and Alex had to hold his face. And I was like, okay, this is what I needed to know this, because I needed to know every actor's dynamic with each other and work with it. Alex and him had worked together before on a wonderful film, so they had a rapport, and I needed to understand that rapport to be able to then bring out the best with him.
And I think here too, like something that you were able to capture is like the father-son passing of the torch. There's such like a family kind of generational moment there, and there you no longer see the
so we start
Rock.
we start the movie with The Rock obviously on the other side of him as a little boy, and then he's alone as a child. And we end the movie with him with Miroslava together, a new family built together, but The Rock is no longer there, which means they have to rebuild. And like you're saying, at the end of the day, the passing on is more of a metaphorical thing for us, which is we are what our parents were. It's our responsibility to hopefully build upon what our parents done for the better, not for the worse. And so I always intended this, again, a storyboard, everything. This was always the opening ending type of bookend that we had wanted to do. And so on day one, it was scary because, again, we hadn't really gotten into the flow of things yet, but we were able to kind of to work that out, and then that's how we ended up, and here it is.
It all worked out.
Yeah.
And something that the other Ukrainian Academy Award nominee from this movie was this song that's playing.
Yeah. So we're very fortunate that again, at least in Ukraine, again, part of the deal that we have, and thankfully with the Ukrainian team and government and whatnot, was that we were going to actually premiere the movie there first, before the rest of the world got to see it, and it ended up being a huge success in the country of Ukraine, and to this day I'm very thankful for that. It's one of the most amazing premieres and experiences I've ever been part of, and just grateful that the audience felt the same way about the film. And overall, the country has responded really well to the film. Internationally, I hope the rest of the world feels the same way. Here in the U.S., I hope our own country feels really great about the film. It seems like people are excited about it. But again, at the end of the day, you can't make a film without, like, as we're watching the credits, it's all about the team around you, and they really did a wonderful job. And it's, at the end of the day, as much as we, spent all this time trying to figure this movie out, they're the hands and feet that we use to express ourselves, and they made what we would intended much better. And I know from Rich, our writer, and from you and from myself, we're super thankful for our crew and for our cast, and for everyone who's been a big part of it. And on top of that, thank you guys for listening to us as we rambled a lot about this film. It was a labor of love, and it again took about 2 years for us to put it all together with a lot of help, and we're excited for the rest of the world to see it. And again, if you ever have any questions about it, just find us, because we live in a day and age where you can find us. And
hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, hopefully we've already started on the next one.
Rising Hawks.
But hopefully you guys follow us along, and we appreciate everything. Thank you guys.